Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Digital EDU Dialogues podcast. I'm Angela Butcher, and joining me today is Dr. Mark Grant, and we're going to talk about his career as an adjunct professor. So welcome, Mark. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Angela. Happy to be here.
All right, so we are going to talk about a few different topics. We will start with how you achieved your goal of getting into teaching. I want to share some practical advice. I want to talk about how you transitioned from on-campus teaching to your newfound love online.
Right.
And want to dive into some of your best practices for working with students as well. So let's get started with your career journey, because I think you just have such practical advice to share for people that want to get started and kind of want to make that transition from applying their career and all the things they've learned in the field into a classroom. So share with us your journey.
Yeah. So, after I got my PhD, and actually during the time when I got my PhD, I said, well, okay, I'll be 55 when I've got this thing. I might as well do something with it. Okay. So I said, maybe this will be a nice way to earn a little extra money. But most importantly, the real reason I started thinking about online teaching is I said, this is something I can do until I'm 65, 70 years old. And I said, well, okay, this will be a way to keep the brain going after I retire. And that was kind of the reason I started looking into teaching as an adjunct. I really didn't have any idea how to start it. And frankly, I'm up here in Massachusetts, and between Providence and Northern Massachusetts, there's probably 100 colleges in the area. So it was pretty easy for me to at least kind of do some research into the business schools. And I started that way. I started literally having a spreadsheet with who's the dean of this university, who's the head of that department. I put together a teaching philosophy and all the typical documents that I thought I'd need. And I just started calling them directly. And I had some moderate luck at first, and I realized I probably needed to change my tactics a smidge. So because I didn't have any experience whatsoever. So that was really how it started. It was just, how can I use these extra letters behind my names to keep my brain going after I retire?
One of the things that I think is it's such a great example that you did was that you made the choice to actually connect with deans and and make those cold calls, and
Right.
Talk a little bit about that experience and how that got you that first gig.
Yeah. So, I've never had a problem doing cold calls. The company I work for, my job I've had many different jobs. One of them I've had is business development person. So I'm used to being able to call up some of our existing customers and say, hey, we've got a new thing for you. Can I talk to you a little bit about it? But you've got to have an angle to get in there. And because calling them up and just saying, hey, I'm here, I want to chat with you for 5 minutes. So what I did is I took a pretty aggressive kind of an approach. And what I did is I said, you know what, I got a degree in my PhD is in organizational behavior. Why don't I build an organizational behavior class? So I built basically a class that was a full-fledged class. It was a 300 level class, and I built it completely with assignments, with case studies. It was a case study based course, but with all sorts of documentation. I even had a book that I had chosen. So I called these folks up and I said, and I always throw out the term. I don't refer to myself as Dr. Grant in business settings, but I figured, okay, I might as well use it. So I'd call everybody up and I'd say, this is Dr. Grant. I'm looking for a job as an adjunct. I wonder if I could come in and speak with you for 20 minutes and talk to you about the course I developed. And to my absolute surprise, nobody hung up on me. So everybody said, yeah, sure. I'd love to have you come in and talk to you about it. And I had no trouble getting interviews. Now, I don't know if that's because, I was considered a peer of theirs having a PhD, or if it was because I had developed a course, or it was because it was a combination of both. But frankly, they opened up their door, and I basically came in and I started talking about them. And the important thing was, having never taught before, I didn't really know the rigors of what was involved in teaching some of these courses. So I remember one time I was talking to somebody at a school in Providence, and we went through the course, and they said, well, can I take a look at your rubric? And I said, well, I'm not really sure what a rubric is, to be very frank with you. And because when I was, PhDs, online PhD stuff, they don't grade with a rubric. And back when I was doing my MBA stuff, back in the 80s. I don't think they graded with rubrics.
Mhm.
Maybe they did, and I didn't know about it. But so you learn a lot about what the deans expect from the material, but it's really a chance to get in there and let them know who you are. And you're always looking for an excuse to get in front of somebody face to face and kind of make a connection. And ultimately, what happened is I made a connection with the dean. And about a month later, she called back and she said, well, I've got a specific class. Would you like to teach it? And I said, sure. And then I got another invitation from another college at the same time to teach an undergraduate class. And I said, yeah, sure. So I was teaching two classes at the same time. So I went from famine to feast, basically. So that was how I started teaching on campus.
What I appreciate about your story is all the initiative that you took to prepare. We hear so often from people that are coming to professor services saying, I've never taught before, but I have all this experience and I have all the degree.
Right.
And one of the things that we encourage them to do is to think about, the trainings that you've given, even to your peers or as part of your day job. So
Yeah.
I think taking that initiative to create that course is such a great example for people, especially when we're looking to teach online, because right now, not is that kind of where it's at, but demonstrating that you've got those skills to do some course development. And I also just appreciate your willingness to learn, and when it comes to things like rubrics, because I feel like even with rubrics, they're constantly evolving and how we use them and how we use them in classrooms. So that learning curve. And so you got started with 2 courses and they were on campus.
Right.
And so talk about, you were enjoying that campus experience and then you switched to online and have made this transition and are enjoying it.
So I taught an undergraduate course, and it was the typical undergraduate course that was it was 13 weeks. It was a typical Tuesday, Thursday, hour and 15 minutes, as opposed to Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 50 minutes. And it was first thing in the morning, so I could get to work. It was right down the street from my office. So I was back in the office by 9:15. So it wasn't a problem. But I will say that the undergraduate course, it was fundamentally slave labor. I'll be very frank with you. It really was. But I knew that going into it. And I said, okay, well, I've got to do it. And that's one of the reasons I took 2 courses. I said, I've got to build up some credibility. So I said, all right, I'll do it. I'll do the undergraduate. And I think by the end of the semester, because the undergraduate, I built in the entire course myself. Okay. So it was a marketing analytics class. So it was fine. I mean, I've been a product manager my whole life. So this was a very easy class for me to teach. But I think when I did the math, my wife and I sat down and did the math at the end of the semester, I think my salary worked out to about $6 an hour. That's really what it boiled down to. And I really didn't particularly like teaching undergrads. But the graduate class, I thoroughly enjoyed it, partly because it was a little bit easier from my schedule standpoint. It was, the school said, what night do you want to teach? I said, okay, I'll teach Wednesday night. That's a good night for me. That works out nicely. And it was a typical 6 to 9 Wednesday night type of a thing. And the courses lasted for 8 weeks. So that was really good. And I liked teaching on campus. And I did that for, I want to say I probably did it up until COVID. And then they stopped it. So I'm going to guess that was probably for 2+ years. Probably because I was teaching 6. I was teaching every 8 weeks. So I was teaching 6. I probably taught a dozen classes. And then COVID stopped, and then they basically stopped everything. But I liked teaching. I liked teaching on campus a lot. But then when COVID hit, they stopped. And then then they called me and they said, "Hey, we'd like you to teach an online class." And I said, I don't know. I'd kind of like to teach on campus. I kind of prefer being able to have that interaction. And I said, but I'll tell you what, because you guys have been so good to me, I'll teach it. I'll try it. You need somebody, fine. Okay. Well, it was the exact same class. It was the exact same book. So the material was easy to learn. But the instructional designers had really done a great job with that class. And frankly, it was way better than the way I had set the on-campus class up. And if I were to go back to teaching on campus that class, I would adopt what the instructional designers had done. It was that good. Now, I tweak things here and there, so I had academic freedom to do some things. but I liked the freedom of teaching online, and it was comfortable for me because my PhD was all online, so I understood all the the Blackboard and things like that. So that
Mhm.
wasn't a real trick, and it was just a little bit more flexible, and I liked it. So I've been teaching online now for probably 2 years, and I just got hired by another university to teach online as well. That's an undergraduate class, but
Mhm.
that's actually directly in my wheelhouse of organizational behavior. So, but the other one was operations management, which I fundamentally do
Mhm.
at work, and I've been doing that forever. And that's one point I should bring up. Maybe this is something that everybody would appreciate, is that the school in Providence came to me a couple of times and said, "Hey, we'd like you to teach such and such a course." And I said, "You know something? I could learn it, but you know what? There's probably better people than me to teach it. And frankly, I'm not sure I would enjoy it.
Mhm.
So I've turned down as many classes as I've accepted, because um, partly for selfish purposes, but partly because I probably wouldn't be as good at it as I am in operations management and organizational behavior.
Mhm.
So I think be willing to turn a course down, I think, would be one of my recommendations. Unless you really think it's not going to be a stress. Like, for instance, I told people I'll never teach an HR course. I'll never teach a finance course, those kinds of things. I wouldn't teach an economics course.
Mhm.
Could I do them? Yeah, but I would stay away from courses I just didn't feel comfortable with.
Mhm. I
There's a lot
appreciate
about
that.
that.
Great self-awareness to say this is not the course for me, and there's probably
Right.
someone else better
Yeah,
to teach it, and
exactly.
then you can deliver your best experiences to students in the classes that you do teach.
Right. And because I try to, and I'm sure everybody listening to the podcast will say the same thing, is that you try to bring your work experience into the class, especially with an MBA. I teach, I try to tell the kids that, they're not kids, most of them are in their 30s and they've had jobs for a few years, but there's some of them that are still in the early 20s. I basically tell them, look, my opinion of an MBA class is it's a tactical degree. So you're taking a learning objective and you're trying to apply it into a real world setting. So I really stress heavily critical thinking from that standpoint.
Mhm.
That's really, and when I prepare the class, I have a course expectations page where I give them a question and I write out, this is not what I expect versus this is what I expect. And here's why I don't expect it, or here's why I do expect it. So I kind of give them that kind of upfront context of what I'm looking for when I teach these classes. And so being able to impart my expertise in my day-to-day job is helpful. So.
I I love hearing that you use exemplars. I feel like they're, especially online, they're so important that students can see what our expectations are. And
Mhm.
that brings us to our next point about working in the classroom and working with students.
Mhm.
And you talked a little bit about how you share your real world experiences in the classroom, and you take some extra special steps to really connect with students. If you could talk about the meeting that you host at the beginning of a semester and how you use that as a
Yeah.
tool to
Well, I've
get
actually
started.
done a couple of things, so I'll talk about that
Mhm.
first, and I'll give you an example of one of the things I did with one of the other classes. But one of the things I do at the very beginning of every class is I invite everybody to a 30-minute Q&A. So in the Q&A, I talk about how the course is designed. I explain what the instructional designer does. I explain how I tweak the questions. I show them how I built the questions to take the expertise of the instructional designer, but I put guardrails on it, on the question. So it kind of forces them to answer the question a specific way. And frankly, that helps me as much as anything, because it makes my job grading easier. The thing that I hate the most is basically getting a paper that's a 10-page paper where I've got to tease out all the information to make sure that, okay, they've answered it. Anyway, so I go through that. The other thing I do is I talk about uh, all the tools that I provide them, and I open up Blackboard or the electronic teaching tools, and I say, um, you know, here's what you should be looking at in your announcements. Here's what you should be looking at in your hints and suggestions. Then I talk about academic integrity, and then I typically talk to them about the final exam and give them some kind of some guidance as to how I think they should be answering and thinking in advance to the final exam as they work through each particular assignment, because it all builds. So that's a 30-minute thing, and it's wide open for everybody. And I get anywhere from, if it's 20 kids in the class, I've got anywhere from 2 to about a dozen show up. So and I frankly can't say courses that show up with 2 versus courses show up with 12, the grades are better. I don't really, I'm not sure I've developed any kind of correlation there yet. So, but I think that's important, and I like to do that because because I'm sure every teacher, every professor has a different way of grading things. So I like to give them some context so they know what to expect. But one of the other things I've done with regard to interaction is on my online course. We had a project that they were doing. So and they had picked a specific topic that's very close to what we were doing. It was basically, they would help trying to figure out how to develop a microgrid. And it was the whole process of how you go about writing it was an operations class, how you write the functional design spec, how you hire different contractors, the whole thing. So I was going through that in the office, and I invited the team of 4, I think it was a team of 4 or 5 kids. I had them come into the to the place, to my office, and I gave them a tour of what a microgrid did, and I talked to different people. So I think it's important to bring students to the if you can do it. And I did that with my undergraduate class too. I brought them right into the office one time because it was close by, and you try to impart some of that stuff any way you possibly can. And of course, there's the regular types of things that you do where they'll call you up and ask questions, and you set up an office type of a meeting and, Zoom call. And I do those all the time. Matter of fact, I just did one this morning with a student who was really struggling quite a bit. So, so that's that.
Well, and that brings up a good transition to our next question is about how you work with students who are struggling. So you had some really great advice about this. So talk about that.
Yeah. So I keep track of how well they're doing. Obviously, it's pretty easy with the grade book and things like that. But if I see somebody struggling, I know the academic advisors know about what's going on as well. But anytime I'm having conversations with a student who's struggling, or especially a student who's not turning in work, not only will I contact the student directly through email, but I always copy the academic advisor to let them know what's going on. It's not really my job to kind of track them throughout their entire career, but the academic advisors are typically with them from day one until they graduate. So I try to make sure that the academic advisor knows what's going on. But I will, when I first started teaching, I would actually chase these students down and say, hey, listen, you haven't turned in your paper. How come you haven't turned in your paper? I'll give you an extra. I don't do that anymore. I was told by that dean who first hired me, I'll never forget. I was chatting with her one day, and I said, yeah, I'm surprised at how many times these kids ask. And she just took her finger like that and she just wagged it in front of me. She says, nope, do not do that. They're adults. They need to turn their papers in. But I still, if I see somebody struggling, I will call them and say, listen, or text them or email them and say, is there something going on that I don't know? Let me know. I'm going to grade you down, but please, you read my policy, and if you need an extension, I'm happy to give you an extension. So that's one thing I do. But the other thing I also do is and I'm not convinced every professor probably likes this kind of thing, but I always give them access to my mobile phone. So I don't tell them they can't call me. I've had people call me on the golf course on a Saturday before, but I tell them to please text me. I said, I leave my email open all the time during work. Okay. So if something dings, it comes across, but I say the best way to reach me is to text me, because if you're working on your assignment at 9 o'clock at night, text me. I may not drop everything I'm doing to help you at 9:30, but I'll text you back immediately, and we'll set something up at 8 o'clock the following morning for 20 minutes to see if I can keep you back on track. So I have no problem. I have no problem giving them my mobile number to text me. So
I agree. I I do that as well. And I have heard colleagues say they don't do that, but I agree. I think it's our easiest form of communication.
It is. It
And
is.
if it's outside of my typical workday, when they are, I also have a lot of, when you have adult learners, they're working during the day. So by the time they get around to that assignment, no one's on email. So getting
Right.
that text message in the evening, I think can be a really helpful tool, even if we don't have all the answers in that moment, to just
Well,
acknowledge and say, yep, let's work on this tomorrow, or let's set up a time.
yeah.
I think texting is our common tool right now.
Yeah. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example of when it didn't work out. I mean, I was watching the Masters last weekend. A student actually called me up, and I knew who it was because I recognized the number. And he's called me a number of times this semester. And I just didn't answer the question. I just didn't answer the call. But I said, send me a text and we'll talk on Monday morning. So I won't answer the call if it's during private time. But an email is very easy to just jot something back to say, call me back later.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's easy, and I didn't miss a shot on the Masters or anything like that, so it worked out fine. So, and I'm hoping he's on track. We'll find
Yes.
out. So we'll find out on Sunday when I grade the papers on Monday to see if he's got week 6 doing well on week 6. So we'll hope for the best.
Now, there's struggling students, and
Mhm.
then there are problem students.
Yeah,
And I think we've all had those experiences with
yeah,
problem students. And let's talk
yeah.
a little bit about your advice for working with problem students and your experiences with that.
Well, I mean, I've got some fresh advice because not this semester, but the last semester, I had a real problem student, and I really I've had problem students before. This one was a particularly. This was I knew she was going to be a problem from day one because we always, one of the assignments, the first assignment is send us a video of who you are and what do you do. And most everybody says, I'm Sally. I work at AT&T. I've got 3 kids and a dog and a loving husband, and I'm doing my class for this and for that and for this and for that. And they chit chat about that. Well, this student started off right away saying, "Well, I'm an activist." And I thought, "Oh boy, here we go." And she's a very lovely lady. I mean, she was an older woman. She was 55, 56. So she was getting her MBA, and okay, fine. And so she challenged me on the first grade. So I said, okay, let me go back and read it. And I went back and read, and I bumped her up a smidge. But then it kept happening week and week and week and 2 and 3 times a week. And she was then copying the dean and copying her academic advisor. So my policy is very simple. I try to stay very, very neutral. I answer her questions, but one thing I always do when I have a student that I can tell what's going on is I make sure that I answer that question almost immediately. Because frankly, what she was doing was baiting me into something that she could, kind of hold over my head at the end of the semester. She didn't like a grade. And actually, the dean actually called up 2 weeks into this and said, "Hey, you're handling her just correctly. I've had her as a student before. Many other professors have had hers, and this is her approach. So my standard process is handle it very carefully, handle it promptly, handle it professionally, and say, okay, you might be bitching about this, but okay, here's where we need to go. This is how I recommend you answer the question, and take all the emotional stuff out of it completely, as irritating as she might be, and just answer the questions directly. Give her some prompting as, hey, by the way, I know you didn't like how the last one was graded. Okay, great. But here's how I think, and just immediately move to, here's how I think you should approach next week's assignment, and give them some ideas and keep it positive and all that sort of stuff. And it worked out well. Now, the funny thing is, the student was upset because she wasn't getting A's, and at the end of the semester, she ended up getting a B plus. And I said, listen, operations management is probably the hardest class you're going to take in your MBA curriculum. And I said, B plus isn't very bad. And she still wasn't very happy, but it was a B plus. And I told her at one point in time, I said, I can't remember what her first name was, but I said, listen, one of the best grades, because she was getting a solid B plus student the whole time. I said, one of the best grades I ever got was a D in my 3rd semester of calculus, because I was just so happy to have passed the class. And sometimes you're not going to be an expert in every single class. Don't worry about it. Okay. Here's how to approach the class to get the most out of it, and do your best. And if it's a B plus or a B or an A minus, don't worry about it, because sometimes just knocking one class off getting one step closer to the end game is enough. And like I said, she was a pretty good student, but she just wasn't happy because of the fact that she wasn't getting an A. So
yeah. Well, along those lines, let's switch to academic integrity. So we have those achievers that want that A, but then we have some students that are not real sure about how to get there. And so talk about academic integrity and your experiences with this, and why you take it so seriously.
Yeah, I take it really very seriously for two purposes. But one, they're here to learn. Okay, that's the primary thing. But I also, so I've had two really egregious things that have happened. One has been consistent. One was very unique. One was a situation where two people had copied, had basically sent in the same final. It was a midterm, sent in the same midterm. And you read the first one, you're thinking, okay, fine, great, made some mistakes here. But then you read the second one, and well, hold on a second here. And they had literally copied each other's papers. But the first one, I knew there was something funky going on, because I changed the questions, or I changed the raw data every once in a while. The question is the same, but the raw data is the same. So I changed the raw data one semester, and the midterm had answered the question based on last semester's raw data. So that was the immediate tip off. So that's one way to combat this stuff. And the school in Rhode Island has a very robust academic integrity group, and they take it very seriously. So you go through the whole process of providing the evidence and all that stuff, and you send it in, and you make your recommendations. And I recommended them to get a 0 on the midterm, and that was that. The other one that that's happened, that was a one-time thing where two students had copied. But the one that I found that happens frequently is that students buy papers from Course Hero, and I think the other one's Study Pool. And I subscribe to both of those, and it costs me a little bit of money, but not too much. And it allows me to download a bunch of different papers. So I always know that if they're not answering the question correctly, or another thing that's a real tip off is if you're spelling a word, and I can't think of a good word, but if you're spelling it with the way the English, like favorite, favorite's a good example, Favorite. But if all of a sudden I see the word spelled Favorite, it's like, whoa, flags go up, and it's like, okay, so what am I going to do? So then I start reading it a little bit more carefully, and then what I found is they're buying papers directly from Course Hero or Study Pool, and it's the same thing. So you have to be vigilant. Now the problem is, I'm frankly not sure what to do with stuff like ChatGPT. I don't know how. I'd love it if anybody had any great ideas. I think the ChatGPT stuff is so good that I'm not sure if I could figure it out anyway, if they were. And I'm not sure the schools have a lot of ability to do that. I suppose Turnitin can do it. Turnitin I find to be a little bit of a pain in the neck, but I've used it before. Yeah, I mean, I should use it more often, I bet, but maybe Turnitin can do it, but I'm not convinced even Turnitin can do it that well, because it's taking so many different sources and creating its own stuff that I think if you get a web percentage copy, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if it was under 5% with ChatGPT. So, but one of the things I do in that, remember we would go back to that Q&A session, I have a whole set of slides just on academic integrity. Here's why I take it seriously. Here's how I can tell what's happening. And I kind of try to instill the fear of God in them without trying to be their mother or father, that, listen, you can't pull one over on me. I hope. And so I must admit, in the last 3 semesters, I haven't had any real issues like that at all. I haven't found anybody at all. So every once in a while I suspect maybe, but I know it's going to be hard to prove. So I just say, okay, well, we'll just go from there. But hopefully the school that there's different folks are listening to, their schools take it as seriously as the 2 schools I teach at now do. And because and I also kind of find as an insult a little bit to me to think that they can pull one over on me because, I'm I'm not stupid. I can kind of tell when you're buying papers. So I kind of also take it as a little bit of a personal insult. So anyway, the good news is I haven't had any problems. But since I've been doing these Q&As, maybe that's part of the reasons. I tell them, look, I changed the assignments around, so maybe that's part of the reason. So
yeah, so they're prepared and they know the expectations.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that as someone who teaches writing with AI tools. That's part of my course introduction, and part of that first week information is here's my expectation and here's what I'm looking for.
Right.
This is why you need to edit. But I know in our previous conversation, I really appreciated that you used that phrase, that they think they can pull one over on you, because I had a class that just started 2 weeks ago, and I thought, wow, do they think I don't know?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's kind of I do find it rather insulting that they think they can push something like that. So and that's why I don't have any tolerance for it. I mean, I just don't. I have zero tolerance for it. I mean, the schools all say, you can apply whatever penalty you want, and I just apply the biggest penalty. I give them a 0 on the paper, and that's
and then
I won't fail them for the course.
Yeah.
But I just give them a 0. End of story. There's no coming back from it. Yeah. And by the way, actually, it's one thing I should point out, a little anecdote here, is that one of the students that probably 3 or 4 semesters ago, when you go through the process, I send them an email saying I've pushed your paper and this assignment over to the academic integrity group, and they'll be contacting you. And you give them a very brief explanation about what's happening and you don't tell them anything else. But the student came back and said, "Oh, but Dr. Grant, this is, I've gone in front of the Academic Integrity Council a couple of times, and I'm worried that if they have another finding against me, I'll be kicked out of the program." It's like, this is not my problem. Right. And in fact, this girl was a serial cheater, and she was dismissed from the program. So, and I had no problem with that at all, because she's not learning anything. And so I had no problem with it. So the school does take it very seriously. I mean, it's a business, yes, but they won't tolerate this stuff on multiple times.
Yes. So. All right. What advice do you have for people that want to get started with teaching, whether it's how to get that first job or to be working in the classroom? What advice do you want to share?
Okay, so this is not meant to be a commercial for the BAB group. Okay, and I'm not a paid sponsor like they show on television commercials or anything like that. But here's the one thing I will say: if you're starting, the amount of effort that it takes to apply at any one school is absolutely astronomical. I would say you've got to get your resume, CV ready. I would put together, and I wish I had written this down before, so I'm going to see, and you can remind me. I have a teaching philosophy that I've put together. As much as I despise it, I've put together a DEI policy that I put together, and I have an academic expectation thing I put together. So I have about 6 or so different documents that I've put together. I have all the stuff from the schools, the grades. I can't think of the right word right now.
Transcripts.
And so I have all that together. And frankly, I went to the BAB group primarily because Danny Babb was my statistics professor at North Central University, where I got my PhD. And I think I probably talked to one of the professors, and they said, "Well, talk to Danny Babb." And I said, "Well, I know her. I've had a class with her." And she introduced me to the company. And I will tell you this much. If you're working full time, I frankly do not see how I could send out resumes on a regular enough basis to be diligent enough at it. So the service that BAB Group provides, and I'm sure you've got competitors out there that do this. I don't see any way to do it. So I think that's the best way, because it is just such a pain in the neck to fill these out. And frankly, even when I've got professionals filling them out for me, they're coming back to me saying, "Hey, you got to do this. You also got to do that. You have to log into this." And my gosh, it's a miserable experience. And I would say it's not expensive. I would say go ahead and do that. I didn't feel like I needed any resume writing experience or I needed any academic philosophy stuff, because I kind of knew what needed to be done there. There's probably better ways to have written a resume so that mine would be picked up a little bit more, maybe looked at, or made its way to the top of the pile, that people have expertise that I didn't do. But I said, I'm just going to go with what I have. So that would be my recommendation, because there's no way I could apply to 20 or 30 of these things in a month. It's not feasible. And I remember one of the statistics that I had seen was that it's something like 1 out of every 40 or 60 applications you send in will you get an interview.
Yeah.
And you know something, it's right on the button. It probably takes 40 to 60 applications that are sent out before you even get a call back for one. So that'd be one of my recommendations. But I would also say, if you're in an area, if you're in an area that has a lot of universities in the area, or maybe even 1 or 2, call up the dean and say, hey, listen, I'm Dr. Jones. I'd like to come in and talk to you about adjunct positions. You may not have any right now, but would you mind if I came in for 15 minutes and chat? And you learn a lot. And I found that for the most part, these people can spare 15 minutes. And like I said, I never had anybody turn me down. Never had one person turn me down across the greater Boston and Providence area. So it worked out fine. And you learn a lot from what's being expected. And like I said, I learned about what a rubric was. So there you go.
Fantastic advice, Mark. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, no problem. It was, I'm hoping people got something out of it.
Today's episode is brought to you by Professor Services. Looking for a job in teaching? Need to expand your network? Want to boost your income? Whatever it is, the expert team at Professor Services has you covered. From helping higher ed faculty find new jobs, to essential tools such as cover letters and CVs, to applying to jobs for you, Professor Services equips you to nail your job search. Don't stress over the job hunt. Maximize your potential and crush your next opportunity with support from our team of experienced administrators, mentors, and educators. Discover how the team at Professor Services can help. Visit professorservices.com today to get started